Paranormal in Pennsylvania may discuss topics such as suicide, murder, and other potentially upsetting things. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Paranormal in Pennsylvania,
where we discuss history and hauntings.
Today's story takes us to Pittsburgh. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Erica.
Let's get into it. This season, we're being sponsored by our friends at Haunted US. They travel the country bringing you real stories of American hauntings every Thursday at hauntedus.com. So today we're talking about St. Nicholas Church. And I'm excited for this one because not only did it come highly requested by multiple listeners, but rather than a bunch of hauntings, it's just one really cool, really long running one.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So, have you heard of St. Nicholas Church? It's in Millvale.
I haven't.
Okay, it's a Croatian church, and I had heard of it because it has these really beautiful murals, and it actually came up when we were looking for wedding venues.
Oh.
It's super beautiful in there. So, the history of this building. The first mass was held there on January 4th, 1900, and it was in a former carriage house that was on the property purchased for the church, but the church wasn't yet finished. So it's like the inception of the church, but not quite yet.
Okay, so like they were on the ground, but not in the building kind of thing? Okay.
Yeah, because the first cornerstone was laid July 22nd of that same year, 1900. So they kind of got the congregation going, and then by July they're like, okay, we do have funds for this church.
Right.
And it was completed later that year and cost $34,000 in 1900s money.
That's what I was gonna say. That's a lot now. That's a lot of money now. I mean, I don't know how much it costs to build a church, but like back in 1900, 34,000.
Yeah. Think about that.
That's a lot of money. Although they do, I mean, churches are so ornate with all the stained glass and then the stone, and then they're all made to look like a cross. I mean, I don't know about this one, but eventually they started looking like that.
I've never thought of that before. Like the bird's eye view of it.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that before.
Yeah.
Wow. Where did you learn that? That's really cool.
You know what? This is like stored information in the back of my brain from CCD when I was like 12.
Wow. That's so cool. I didn't know that. Now I want to look at a bird's eye view of this church just to see. I mean, it is old, so I wonder.
Right, because again, I don't know when they started doing that. It might not have been all the way back in 1900, but now, like the church that's around here in Oakland, like North Oakland.
Yeah, St. Peter.
Yes, maybe? That one is shaped like a cross. I know that.
That is so cool. This is the oldest Croatian Catholic church in the United States.
Oh.
So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
If it is. And it was in 1921, there was a big fire, and it was unfortunately destroyed mostly. Everything burned, including a really significant organ. They had this really ornate organ that was donated by Andrew Carnegie, and everything burned in the church except the statue of the Virgin Mary, who remained standing above where the altar used to be, seemingly untouched, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, that is very interesting. It is, like, especially because the Catholic religion is really one of the only Christian religions that puts a huge emphasis on the Virgin Mary. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very interesting that this is like a Catholic church and it was the only thing left standing.
Yeah, I thought it was super cool. And it was rebuilt in 1 year, which blows my mind because they didn't have technology like we have right now, and they also had to raise all the funds to rebuild it.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
Yeah, and it was in the 20s, so it's not like people had a ton of money.
No.
But, I mean, I guess it was before the Depression, but
true.
Either way.
And I think, like, religion was so important back then. I think, so maybe that's why. Maybe everybody was like, we got to get it back up and running.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure if Carnegie donated an organ, he was like, here's the money to fix your church.
True.
In 1937, the church was renovated with the addition of many hand-painted murals, and this is where it gets its like fame in the Pittsburgh area. I think it's cool on its own for being the oldest Croatian Catholic church in the United States, but the murals are apparently really a sight to be seen. In 1954, a convent was added for the Sisters of St. Francis, who taught at St. Nicholas, and in 1990, it was added to the National Register of Historical Places, which totally deserved.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yeah. At that point, what, 80 years? Yeah, that was
Yeah.
easy math. I don't know why I needed to question that. But yes,
Yeah.
80 years. That's a
And-
long time.
Yeah, and it still offers mass today, and it's part of the Shrines of Pittsburgh, which is like a Catholic church union thing.
Oh.
I don't know how to call it better.
Interesting.
But it's located at 24 Maryland Avenue in Millvale, and like I said, you can even have your wedding there. So very, very cool, very beautiful. I think I might have been here one time,
Yeah.
but I don't think it was very long. I think I just went in to look at the murals one time when I was in Millvale. But definitely, I didn't notice anything paranormal when I was there.
Right.
But there's a good reason for that. So, the paranormal story. The haunting here dates back to 1937 when the murals were being painted. And a lot of times the story is called The Ghost and the Painter or The Painter and the Ghostly Priest, like stuff like that.
That's really cool.
And there was even an article in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette about this, and they have it on their website. I have the link so I can add it to the description, where it talks about it, and it's like a copy of the front page of the newspaper. It made the front page, this haunting. So it's super cool to me.
Yeah, that is. That's so awesome that they put it on the front page.
Yeah.
And then we know significant.
Right. So Maxo Vanka was a renowned artist who was hired to paint all of these murals, and they wanted him to paint them very, very quickly. So he was working 16 to 18-hour days to finish them, which is just insane because I think of like the story of the Sistine Chapel and laying on your back to paint. This must have been the same.
Yeah.
You know, you need all that scaffolding to get up to the ceiling.
Yes, and I always think with stuff like this and people working that long, my creativity runs out very quickly. I mean, I don't think I would last 16 to 18 hours trying to paint something. So that's incredible.
Right, and your fine motor skills. I could imagine your hands would start aching. That's a long time. And he had to do that for 2 whole months. So that's a lot of hours painted in a very short amount of time.
Yes.
To get as best sleep as he could and not interfere with morning mass, he would arrive mid-morning to the church and then finish well after midnight. The father who was there at the time, Father Zagar, or Zagar, Z-A-G-A-R, would offer him coffee to help him stay awake, and he used to see the father walking through the church late at night, and he always assumed the father was there to keep him company or pray or even practice his sermon for the next day, because he would see him like walking between or even sitting in pews.
Right.
So he finally said to the father something like, "Whoa, why don't you say hi? I see you walking. There's no one but us." Or like, "Say your sermon out loud. I'd love to hear it." And Father Zagar said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm asleep." Which is crazy.
Yeah, that really is.
Because this had happened, by the time he said something, it had happened 4 nights in a row. So Maxo was completely convinced that he was there.
Yes.
And he said that it must be a ghost because he was so sure that he had seen the figure. So that begs the question of who is this ghostly priest and what spirit is lingering. So there was a few suggestions when this came up. Some of the priests there seemed to have some unfinished business, either with the congregation or the church or God. One of the priests took money from the congregation and instead gave it to his family, which is just crazy
Yeah.
to me.
No, that is. I mean, it's interesting because it's like the end of that is gave it to his family, which is like, okay, kind of nice, but also not great. The
Right.
first part, not great.
Right. And then another, it just said he neglected his duties out of laziness, often giving like subpar sermons, etc. And the assumption is that these priests owe a, quote, debt to God and are trying to prove themselves in their afterlife so that they can eventually get into heaven.
Oh, they're in like purgatory.
Yeah. Yep. Stuck with
That's
this
their
church in Millvale.
purgatory. Which is kind of interesting because I know we talk about like where would be a good place to kind of live your afterlife. And I do think if, again, we get a choice, this would be a nice place to settle.
Yeah.
Especially if you were a priest. But to think of it in different terms as like purgatory, which is a place that's okay, but not a place that you want to be forever. That's kind of interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting concept of this debt to God because, you know, what is it, St. Peter's list? Or the guy who, like, makes the list to see if you can get into heaven?
I think it's St. Peter. I think you're right.
It's like, they're on the list as, like, pending is how I picture it. Like, what a crazy concept to me. So Maxo ended up telling the staff of the church and, of course, the father about this. And they decided they were just going to let this spirit do as it pleased and try not to interfere at all. They believed that because it was in this church that it was God's will, that the spirit was there, so let it do what it needs to do per God's will, and then it will hopefully pass to heaven eventually, which sounds like a Catholic Church response. However, the neighborhood dogs would bark nightly around the time that the priest would appear, to the point that Maxo used to have to wear earplugs while he was painting.
Now that to me helps this whole thing, because my first thought was, how far into the 2 months did he start seeing this ghost? Because it could be a hallucination if this man was not getting sleep.
That's true.
So I was like, were there other witnesses? And so if the dogs were also barking and assumedly also saw and were irritated by this presence, then that kind of gives credence to that theory.
Because I also thought paint fumes. Like, if you're laying and painting right above yourself, paint is, you know, very strong. And if you're breathing that in 16 hours a day and on little sleep, I think hallucination could happen. But I agree, this gives it a lot more credence.
Yeah.
But it also, for me, begs the question, if this didn't happen every day, and it didn't say, if it didn't happen right at the start, what caused this priest to start showing up now? Because I can't imagine that all of the dogs in this neighborhood around the church are barking at 11 p.m. every day forever, and no one has done anything. Right? Someone would have to think something was up. Unless, no, there's no way they could let that go.
I don't think so. I mean, because we all know how irritated people get with dogs nowadays, and I feel like it had to be the same, right? Like human behavior, we're all going to get annoyed at something that's barking at like 3 o'clock in the morning, or whatever time this is. Late at night, because he left like well past midnight, right? So like later at night. But I do think that's an interesting question, because I don't know. I can't imagine that if they're rebuilding and he's doing murals for the church, that anybody there and or God would be upset about it.
Right.
You know?
So I'm wondering if it's just like, they always say that renovations can like stir up spirits, so I'm wondering if it's something like that, or it's just the fact that there was someone there at night for the spirit to preach to. I think there's a lot of possibilities here.
Yeah. Hi listeners! We're so excited to tell you about our partnership with Haunted US. Haunted US is an online publication that brings you credible articles on the history and specific paranormal claims of haunted locations across the country. We've even used them to research some of our episodes. Visit hauntedus.com for new haunted places every Thursday.
It started with Maxo seeing this priest, but then it escalated to ghostly interactions with the physical world. So, like I said, the spirit of the priest was appearing as an apparition and walking around. But it also blew out the eternal flame, which is supposed to never be blown out and apparently is really hard to extinguish. So that's kind of crazy. And it lit the altar candles. So lighting the altar candles, I think, is definitely congruent with it being a priest. But blowing out the eternal flame seems sacrilegious to me.
It does, and if we kind of go back to the thought that there might be priests with unfinished business, maybe in some capacity they don't have a debt to God, but maybe they're rebelling in their afterlife.
Okay.
Like, they didn't get into heaven and now they're mad.
Okay, I could see that.
But yeah, other than that, I would also think it was like someone sacrilegious.
Yeah. Right. Unless it's like an accident, but that seems weird.
Yeah, like maybe like the spirit like lit the altar candles and accidentally blew out the eternal flame while doing it. It was like, oh, my bad.
Oops. Yeah, but the spirit would also knock on Father Zagar's chamber, which is interesting because, again, that's something that's fairly disruptive. And Father Zagar responded every night that it happened by saying he would pray for the spirit to have peace in heaven. And it eventually stopped. So maybe some of it was annoyance, or maybe just confusion if the spirit wasn't realizing, that it wasn't still the main priest of the church.
Ah, that's possible.
But I feel like, now, I don't know what actually happens in heaven, but I feel like, theoretically, you like go there and you have a conversation, you're either in heaven or not. So if you went there and you had a conversation like, oh no, you're not ready for heaven yet, then he would know, the priest would know that he wasn't the active priest anymore,
Yes. Yeah. And the other question I have is like when the eternal flame was blown out, because I think there is from Good Friday to Easter, I think it's blown out.
Oh, so the timing could have been off even.
Yeah, so maybe they thought that it was a different time period. Maybe it was during that time. And then, I mean, if they have the eternal flame, I assume it was the same kind of things. But I think that's true. I think from Good Friday until Easter, it's blown out.
That would make sense, right? Look at us. We're like,
I know.
Catholicism, we know things. Okay, so that makes sense. People still report the hauntings to this day if they're there at night, which is so cool to me. I love ones that run like 100 years and it's the same thing. So specifically, they seem to start around 11 p.m. And if you look into the window of the church, apparently you can see the priest sitting in the pews or walking along the aisle. People also report temperature changes at the time that the priest appears. It is an old building, obviously, so I always take stuff like that with a grain of salt, because how are they capturing them? Is it just something they feel? But I think it's cool that you can even look in the windows to see the priest sitting there.
Yeah, and I also like that that's happening at 11, because that's like not super, super late. So I feel like I would feel comfortable looking in the windows at that time.
Yeah.
Rather than like, what do we call it at 3 or 4?
The witching hour.
The witching hour. I mean, I don't want to be anywhere at 3 or 4 p.m.
Yeah.
So like having it happen at 11 p.m. I think is pretty cool too.
Yeah. We'll have to go and see one night if we can all stay up that late.
Yeah. That's also
what we can see. That's the overall haunting. That's pretty much all that was reported there. I looked for other cases of just general hauntings, but everything that happens, the only apparition is this priest, and everything that happens is associated back to this priest.
Okay.
Like any spirit orbs that might be captured or strange noises like footsteps, they associate it back to the priest because it's such a well-known haunting.
Right.
So no other distinct apparitions, but definitely general things that happen.
Right, yeah.
And I think this is a really interesting haunting. I almost said one of my favorites, but there's so many that I love more. I just think it's cool because it's this one spirit that's there. You don't really know why. There's so many theories on why. And I wonder how long it's going to be there. Like, when does it cross over, if ever?
Yes, I think that's a really interesting question too. So I remember, first of all, I think this is one of my faves because I think like anything to do with Catholicism, but like the historical aspects of it, not the trauma part of it.
Not the Catholic guilt.
Not that part, but anything from the history I think is just interesting to me. I think there was a really complicated past, and so getting to see places like this and knowing that someone was there in the 1900s painting is awesome.
And I think what you said about the Catholic Church and religion being so significant is what makes this really cool to me, because the Catholic Church had so much power early on. It was huge. And I also think it's really interesting that this is specifically a Croatian Catholic Church. I did not know that there was tons of Croatians here, but there was clearly enough to spend $34,000
Yes.
in 1900 to build the church, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, so much money in the 1900s.
I know. So I would love to go back to this church. I'm always a bit trepidatious to go to churches unless it's like Notre Dame in France or something like that, because I don't want to disrupt the people that go there. You know, I like to respect it as a place of worship. And even when I do go to churches, like David and I were just in Europe, when we went into churches, we were still very quiet and respectful, but I don't want to interrupt people's worship time, so I'm very hesitant. But I would love to go here. I would love to do a paranormal investigation here, but I don't think they would be amicable to that.
Yes. Okay, so I just remembered what I was saying before I lost my train of thought. There is a prayer that you can say that helps souls that are in purgatory go up to heaven.
Oh.
And I don't really remember what it is, but I remember that. And so I think it would be really cool to maybe like sit down and say that one. And
Yeah.
But I agree. I don't know that they would be amicable to an investigation. I don't know. I doubt it. But if they did report on the spirit and on the ghostly happenings, then maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I just want to understand who this spirit actually is and why they're there, right? That's the whole point of our podcast. I mean, everyone really not everyone, a lot of people in the paranormal community, that's the reason that they are so interested. We want to understand these spirits. Why are they stuck here? If they are stuck here, what's their story?
Right.
So I think it would be really cool to be able to interact, but I don't think we'll get that chance. Because we'd have to be there in the church at 11 p.m.
Right. Yes. Oh, I do think trying to go, again, with respect, I don't know if this really is respectful, but even if we were to go outside and try to look into the windows at 11 p.m., I still think even that would be cool to see if we could see something.
Yeah.
Just from the outside.
That's fine. I mean, I believe it's on one of the, or near one of the main streets in Millvale.
Okay.
And we could always just feign like, oh, we were out at the bars and now we're looking in this church window. Like, they'd be like, you guys are all completely sober. What? No.
We're not. We'll go on a Saturday and be like, we thought we would just wait here for Sunday Mass. We thought that we would sit outside. And just
we are
chill.
so committed and ready. We want to make sure we get the best spot. Oh my gosh, they'd be like, please don't come back. Yeah, but that is the haunting of St. Nicholas in Millvale. Any additional thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I really liked this one.
Me too. I love the story, and I love that it was covered by a newspaper because that makes it so legit in my head. So thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of Paranormal in Pennsylvania. Tune in next Thursday to see what history and hauntings we discuss next. Stay spooky, my friends.